Media
Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, so good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all here. My name is Caroline. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam. And today I'm here to talk to you about social robots in the lives of children. So let's go ahead. I'll talk in English. I'll try to be slow such that the interpreters can keep up with me. If you have any questions later, just ask me. So let's start all the way at the beginning, right? What are social robots anyway? Well, broadly speaking, there's three kinds of social robots. First, we have mechanomorphic robots. And these are robots that basically resemble machines. And Cosmo here, all the way on the left, is a perfect example of this category. Cosmo resembles a little excavator, and you can basically play games with it using these blocks, which it can stack, etc. Then we have zoomorphic robots, which resemble animals. And Pleo, the little dinosaur robot, is a perfect example of this category. Pleo is a robot that you need to raise, you need to feed it, and you need to teach it how to do things. And that can really take some time and effort, as one of the professors in our department experienced. She took this robot home for a couple of weeks once to try to test it. And in the end, she just turned it off completely because it drove her crazy. She didn't have any alone time anymore because this robot would even follow her into the bathroom. And then the third category is anthropomorphic robots. These are robots that resemble machines, as you see. And these robots are often able to engage with you in a verbal interaction, in a conversation. So this is just to show you that there's a variety of robots that all look different. These robots also have different capacities. And therefore, it's difficult to define what a social robot is based on how it looks or what it does. So if not based on appearance or capacities, then when is a robot considered social? Well, according to Lee and colleagues, a robot can be called social if it is autonomous, if it's able to interact not only with people, but also with other robots and its environment, if it adheres to the norms that rule human behavior, if it is intelligent, if it automatically is able to detect people based on sensory recognition, and if it both expresses and understands human emotion. Well, that's quite some requirements to being social, right? However, to date, most social robots are still really quite limited, contrary to media depictions, I'd say. And to demonstrate this to you, I brought little clips from our own robot in our lab. So let's have a look.
I can't connect to the network. I can't connect to the network.
So it's unable to connect to the internet network. Other problems?
Hello, I am going to stand up.
So it said, I'm going to stand up, not going to happen. And not only standing up, but also remaining on its feet is a little difficult still. Yeah, quite sad. But it's able to get out now, though, so that's good. But yeah, you'll agree with me, I think, that if this is difficult for current social robots, then these expectations are a little bit too high, really, still. So what if social is then not determined on the technological capacities of a robot, but rather based on the user's response to it? That's what Amy van Wijnsbergen proposed when she defined social robots as robots that are perceived to be social. So here the focus is not on the technological specifications of the robot, but rather on the perception of the users interacting with this robot. Well, this is certainly a more realistic definition to use. However, Kay Darling and colleagues investigated how people respond to a Roomba robot, which you see here on the screen. So this is basically a robotic vacuum cleaner without any social skills whatsoever. And in her study, she still saw that people name this robot, they talk to it extensively, and they feel bad for it when it, for instance, gets stuck under a couch. Exactly, yes, same. So we do this all the time in our lives, correctly. But so if sociality is in the eye of the beholder, right, then basically any robot or any object, a car, could be termed social. So what I'm speaking of when I speak of social robots are robots that are primarily made for interactions with people, basically. So I understand social robots to be robots whose primary purpose is to speak with people or to interact with people, rather than, for instance, do chores or work in a factory. So this definition also clearly distinguishes between, on the one hand, social robots and on the other hand, functional robots. But we're here today to talk about children, so let's do so. Children will, in the near future, increasingly encounter social robots in their daily lives. And we know that children tend to think of such robots as potential friends. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First, children have strong anthropomorphic tendencies, which basically means that they see human everywhere in their surroundings. Adults do this too, as we just saw from the Roomba research, but children have a much stronger tendency to do this. So they basically interpret their surroundings in human-like terms, and therefore also relate to social robots as if they're relating to a peer, to a human. Second, children find it hard to distinguish between what is real and what is not, at least until the age of 8 to 9 years old. This is, for instance, demonstrated by the fact that in this age range, children start to understand that Santa Claus is not real, but when they encounter Santa Claus in a shopping mall, they will still be very excited and nervous for that. And this is because they are still not very able to distinguish between their fantasy on the one hand and reality on the other. Third, and not unimportantly, adults also present social robots to children as potential friends. And so it's little surprising that children then interpret them as such, right? Now, the question is whether it's a good or a bad thing that children have this social response to robots. And some scholars argue that it's a good thing, even stating sometimes that to promote the welfare of children effectively, some degree of bonding between the robot and child will have to occur. And indeed, it seems that the emergence of social relationships between children and robots can be beneficial to the use of robots in societies. So, for instance, scholars have investigated whether we can use social robots in hospitals to accompany children who have cancer during their treatment, and more specifically when they have to undergo radiation therapy. So, during this specific treatment, parents are not able to stay with children in the room, but a robot is able to do so. And when children consider this robot that accompanies them a friend, it can offer them more effective social support during this treatment. Another setting in which it may be beneficial for children to see robots as friends is education, because there are some studies that suggest that if children feel a kind of friendship to a robot, they learn more effectively from this robot too. But let's also have a look at the other side of the coin, because there's also scholars that are quite concerned actually about this tendency that children have to see robots as friends. For instance, Sherry Turkle, who argues that social robots are seductive and offer the wrong payoff, the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship, and the illusion of connection without the reciprocity of a mutual relationship. Scholars have, for instance, argued that child-robot relationship formation may have negative consequences for the child when a robot breaks down or when it's taken away from a child. So, for instance, imagine that a child has ended their hospital stay, so they go home, and they have undergone this treatment together with a robotic friend. Then at the end, when they leave the hospital, they also have to leave their robots behind. And these robots in such applications are often programmed to really encourage children to think of them as human-like peers. So they, for instance, pretend to have a personality and to actually care for the child. Now, you can imagine that due to this, for children, it really feels like they then have to leave a friend behind. So they suddenly just do not see this friend anymore, which can be quite distressing. Also, imagine that a child is undergoing treatment, and in the middle of this treatment, their robotic friend breaks, and they have to suddenly go through the rest of it alone. That can be quite emotional to them. Also, some scholars have warned that under some circumstances, some children may start to prefer playing with robots over playing with peers. This picture is from a research that is currently going on in the Netherlands, where they're investigating the use of social robots in primary schools. And these robots are used as a confidant for bullied children. So what happens then if a bullied child can confide in this robot, but at a certain point starts preferring to play with this robot in break time rather than play with their peers? That could harm their development of social skills and further deteriorate their social situation. Also, most people would agree that if a child tells to a robot about a bullying experience, their teacher should know about this in order to be able to step up and do something about the bullying. But what if a child tells about a bullying experience to a robot in private and expects their robot friend to keep this a secret? Then when the teacher suddenly knows that the child told this to the robot, the child can actually feel kind of betrayed, which may cause emotional harm as well. Also, if robots need to store information that children tell them during such conversations, this of course raises privacy issues and the risk of this information being used for the wrong purposes and by the wrong people. And finally, scholars have voiced the concern that children will develop master-servant relationships with robots. That is to say, children tend to see robots as friends, but at the same time, they can tell these robots what to do, right? They are kind of the boss in this relationship. And so the worry is that at a certain point, if children in the future get used to these robotic relationships, they may start to display this behavior in peer friendships as well. So they may get less used to situations in which they have to negotiate about decisions, and therefore their bossy behavior toward robots may spill over to their relationships with peers. Now, of course, one could wonder whether we should really be so worried, right? Because there's always worries every time a new technology is introduced into children's lives. We are worried what it may do to them. For instance, when the Tamagotchi first came on the market, people were really worried that this would ruin children's sense of consequence, because the Tamagotchi can be reset. Every time it dies, you can press the reset button and it comes to life again. And there were great worries that this would ruin children's sense of the severity of these consequences in real life. Also, the same with the Furby, which is often considered the first prototype of a social robot. People were really concerned what happens when children get attached to these Furbies and then the Furby breaks. Now, the current situation, the current generation who grew up with these technologies seems to be fine, and I can speak from personal experience in that sense. I had a Tamagotchi and I'm fine. So we could say, should we really be so worried about robots, right? Is that really necessary? Well, we're not sure yet, but at least there's two important differences between social robots and these technologies. First, robots are able to engage children in verbal interactions, and therefore the interactions that children have with these robots, as well as the relationship they develop with them, are much more similar to peer friendships, and therefore can have a different influence on children. And second, robots can actively encourage the emergence of a child-robot relationship through conversations, among others. And therefore, as opposed to these attachments that children form with, for instance, their Furby, child-robot relationships are not only based on the child's fantasy, but also on robot influence. Now, luckily, all is not lost, because one thing that may help to decrease potential downsides of child-robot interaction is transparency, which is what Boden and colleagues already in 2017 argued in their Principles for Responsible Robotics, in which they, among others, state that robots are manufactured artifacts and their machine nature should be transparent to their user. Because when we're being transparent, people will be better able to understand what a social robot is, what it is not, what it is capable of, and what it cannot do. And therefore, this will lead to more realistic expectations from the beginning, which may in turn decrease the risks that we just discussed. Calls for transparency can also be found in, for instance, the Montreal Declaration of Responsible AI, as well as in the European Commission's AI Act. However, initial studies seem to suggest that transparency is ineffective in changing children's responses to social robots. For instance, Turkel and colleagues reported that even when they explained to children the mechanic nature of a robot, and each child was allowed to turn off the robot and control it themselves, then still children continued to think of this robot as a living and human-like being, so they were unable to demystify the machine to the children. In addition, if children see robots as friends, or they need to see robots as friends in order for robot applications in society to be successful, then one could wonder whether a transparent, responsible approach to social robots does not stand in the way of the effective use of robots in society. Given that existing research on the topic was really quite scarce still and had a lot of limitations, we didn't know yet. And that is why me and my colleagues decided to further investigate the question whether and how transparency about social robots influences how children respond and relate to such robots. Therefore, we conducted 3 experimental studies in which children aged 7 to 10 years old interacted with a Now robot. Either at school, at a museum, they had a short conversation with this robot. And in each of these studies, half of the children was provided with transparent information about the robot, whereas the other half of the children received neutral, robot-unrelated information. After their interaction, then, they'd fill out a questionnaire, and this way we could measure whether children who had received transparent information thought of the robot differently than children who had not received this information. So, in the first experiment, I sat next to children during their interaction with this Now robot, and I provided them with either transparent information or neutral information. And you can see an example of this information here on the screen. So, to half of the children, I said that the story that Now had told them was put into Now's computer because robots can only say what is in their computer, thereby being transparent about the robot's mechanic nature and its lack of human capacities. Whereas in the other condition, I only told children something unrelated to the robot, so something neutral. So here I talked about fairy tales and the creatures that pop up in those. So transparent versus neutral. In the second experiment, the same neutral or transparent information was offered to the children, but this time I didn't tell them, but the robot told them about itself. So this time, during the conversation, the robot itself would explain to half of the children that it was a machine with limited technological capacities. And since the information being provided in this study was exactly the same as the information provided in the previous study, this study had the aim to see whether robots can also be effectively transparent about themselves. Now, as said before, robots that exist today are often still quite limited, and therefore they cannot yet reliably and autonomously interact with children by themselves, which is why often these robots are manually controlled by a human during their interaction with children. And in this third study, I wanted to see whether children would respond differently to the robot and think about it differently when they knew about this upfront. So here, to half of the children, I received the manually controlled nature of the robot upfront by telling them that during their interaction with the robot, I would control it from a distance, from a laptop. I also told them that Now couldn't talk to them by itself, that I had to press a button every time to make the robot say something, and that I had to start up a computer program before they could ask the first question to the robot, because in that computer program, I wrote the responses that Now would give. So, complete demystification. So what did we find? Well, in all of these studies, we saw that children who had received the transparent information about the robots had more realistic robot perceptions than children who had received the neutral information, who were in the other group. These children, for instance, thought of the robot less as a living being. They perceived it to be less human-like, and they also thought that it was less similar to themselves. In addition, we found that children who had received the transparent information were more critical toward the robot's friendship potential. That is, they felt less closeness toward the robot and also trusted it a little bit less than children in the neutral group. At the same time, neither closeness nor trust disappeared completely. So transparency did not stand completely in the way from children's perception of the robot as a potential friend, but it did make them a little bit more critical toward this robot. So there's 2 main messages that I'd like for you to take home from all of this. The first of which is that responsible robotics allow children to take a more critical stance toward social robots. And the second one is that this more critical stance toward robots does not have to stand in the way of the effective implementation of social robots in society aimed at increasing children's welfare. Thank you very much.
Caroline, thank you very much for your speech. Czy mają Państwo jakieś pytania? Are there any questions?
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. Super interesting, especially like from this perspective. And my question is to you, whether you research also the role of parents in providing social robots to children, and whether they are aware of all the principles, how social robots work, how the information is proceeded in terms of privacy, data protection of the kids, because it's sensitive data, and if they collect something, so like, what the role of parents in this process? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In my work, I do not research parents' involvement in this, but a colleague of mine who works with the Cosmo robot that we saw all the way in the beginning, she does in-home research. So she basically bought 500 of these robots and distributed them to families across the Netherlands. And she basically, for a couple of months, observed how children and parents interacted with this robot. And one of the findings from that study was that parents' stance towards the technology is very important in children's adoption of a social robot and how they basically see it. So we see that parents have a major role to play here. At the same time, we also see that robot literacy, so parents' robot knowledge, is really still lacking a little bit. So here there's really also indeed a challenge of not only informing children, but informing their parents alongside with that to enable conversations at home about this new technology and the role it may play. Yeah, very good point.
I have another question. Do you have information about, is that a growing trend in terms of marketing? Are there more and more robots for children? Is it a future that we should expect in a few years, like to have robots in, I don't know, every second home?
Well, I think it's not going as fast as the media tries to make us believe. I mean, there's more and more robots on the market, but there's also a lot of robot companies going bankrupt mainly because I think expectations of robots are currently way too high. So when we buy a robot or when we use it, we have sky-high expectations of what this can do for us or our child. And often this is really not the case. As you saw in the videos, robots are really still quite limited. Which is also why at this point they are used in society, but mostly in public settings, for instance, hospitals, schools, where they can be manually controlled by researchers or by therapists, for instance, and not so much yet in children's homes, I think. I think it will be the future. There will be more robots, but it will go much slower than anticipated. Thank you. Thanks.
Z naszą kolejną prelegentką połączymy się
We're going to connect online with the next speaker, Linda Barlington-Lynch, the Director for International Affairs for 5R Rights. And she will present her thesis, How to Make Children's Safety Online a Fact. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me today. I just want to check that you don't have an echo. Are we okay? Okay, I'll start unless someone tells me otherwise. So thank you again for the invitation. I'm very sorry not seeing you in person today. I am Leonda Barrington-Leach from the 5 Rights Foundation. We are an NGO with the mission to build the digital world that children and young people deserve. As an organization, we work closely with kids, we do research, we work with IT practitioners, and we provide expert support to policymakers around the world. Our work is global. And I am based in Brussels. It gathers around 3 goals. The first goal is the normative task of ensuring that children's rights are fully recognized across digital policy and law. We worked closely with the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child for over 3 years to support the drafting and child consultation of the General Comment number 25, which sets out precisely and quite prescriptively how children's rights apply and need to be upheld by states. Now we're working to ensure it is transposed and permeates regional and national law and policies. We have also developed a practical toolkit for policymakers to implement child rights in the digital environment. So while there may be many gaps, there are no excuses for not filling them. Our second goal is to ensure the concrete enforcement of children's rights through data protection law. 2 years ago, Five Rights founder and chair Baroness Biban Kidron introduced the Age-Appropriate Design Code into law in the UK. This is the first enforceable legal code for children's rights in this space. The Age-Appropriate Design Code is grounded in European data protection law, the GDPR, and has inspired similar initiatives already in Ireland, France, the Netherlands, and Sweden. 2 weeks ago, a Californian age-appropriate design code, modelled on the UK law, was signed into law after getting through each and every stage of the legislative process without a single vote against, and this in the home of Silicon Valley. The code has now been in force in the UK for over a year, and it has driven the biggest wave of change in the design of digital products and services since GDPR itself. It's now enforceable on both sides of the Atlantic, notably covering both Silicon Valley and the Dublin European headquarters of big tech. Our third goal is to build a consistent and comprehensive safety by design framework that ensures all digital products and services likely to be accessed by children are designed with their rights and best interests in mind from the get-go. This is nothing radical. In fact, it is simply applying product safety law to digital products, which are a growing proportion of all products. Product safety provides a solid and proportional framework for both innovation and regulatory oversight. If your product falls into a high-risk category, it must be certified before being marketed. If not, the producers just need to be able to show that they conformed with any existing standards if they are asked by the regulator. We worked with the IEEE, that's the Institute for Electronic and Electrical Engineers, to develop a technical standard on age-appropriate design. This standard has now been made available free of charge to companies. It can also be the basis for a European standard to underpin, among others, the Digital Services Act, the AI Act, the new proposal for a regulation on preventing child sexual abuse, and the reviewed General Product Safety Regulation. Based on this standard, we will also shortly publish a code of practice for safety by design to guide policymakers and regulators in their implementation of existing commitments, not least for the digital service coordinators to the Digital Services Act. So once again, for both companies and regulators, if there are gaps, there are no excuses not to fill them. I will come back to the fundamental principles underpinning this work, but first I'd like to share a few facts and figures to highlight the nature of the risks that children are facing. So consider addiction. 4 in 10 children say they rarely disconnect from social media, and various studies find between 1/3 and half of kids worry themselves that they are addicted to the internet. Consider commercial exploitation. Many online games are deliberately designed to extract as much money as possible from players. Essential aspects of the game, such as energy and experience, appear as resources that deplete before the player's eyes, with the option to pay to improve gameplay. 80% of apps marketed as suitable for 5-year-olds contain in-app purchases. 15% of kids have stolen money to pay for loot boxes. Consider gender stereotypes and violence. 10% of 12 to 13-year-olds say they are addicted to porn. 80% of girls say it is common to be put under pressure to provide sexual images of themselves. Consider child sexual abuse. The fastest growing category of child sexual abuse material is self-generated and involving 7 to 10-year-olds. So please also consider, most importantly, the vicious circle this is creating. 80% of consumers of child sexual abuse material on the dark web say they first accessed this material when they were children themselves. 40% were under the age of 13. More than half say they stumbled across it accidentally. Somehow it was served up to them. The same vicious circle is evident for growing online gender-based violence. So where's the problem? We humans are far from perfect. People put a lot of nasty stuff out there, and some do some really bad things. Kids themselves are also busy exploring, they're testing the limits. However, the way popular digital products and services are designed pushes the risks far beyond the reasonable. It gives a platform to the worst of human nature and exploits our vulnerabilities. Those who suffer the most are children. The data economy is an attention economy. It intentionally uses persuasive design to get and keep users online, engaging, sharing, and creating content. It exploits psychological techniques, grounded, for example, in our survival instinct bias, which leads us to pay more attention to a threat than to good news, or in our nature as social animals motivated by the desire to be liked. This leads to children being systematically exposed to a wide variety of risks. Five Rights Pathways research showed that social media accounts registered as children were all subject to messaging from strangers and illegal or harmful content within hours of being set up. While these accounts were targeted with advertisement for games, sweets, teenage tampons, and such like specifically for kids, they were at the same time also recommended harmful content from sexualized to pro-suicide material by algorithms that weight negative or extreme content 5 times higher than neutral or positive content. At the moment, it is clear that the problem is a feature and not a bug of the system. Thus, the solution must be to act at the level of the system. Our approach is based on a few critical principles. First, the foundation is the rights of the child, which follow the child. This means that any effective action must cover all products and services, big or small, that children are likely to access. We should resist efforts to complicate and divide the issues into boxes labeled, for example, online platforms, gaming, AI, the metaverse, online CSEA, cyberbullying, or disinformation, for example. If we don't deal holistically with the issue, then the house always wins, so to speak. In the end, there are more loopholes than netting, and enforcement is weak. Secondly, the solution must be delivered upstream by integrating children's rights by design and default. You can't systematically recommend children's profiles to strangers, make visible their location, nudge them to respond to a direct message or to try out live stream, and then think if you have a line in the terms and conditions and a report button somewhere, everything's fine and dandy. No, it's not. It has to be about due diligence, doing your homework in advance, and mitigating risk and harm. It also can't be about shutting children out from spaces where they have a right to be. And it can't be all about digital literacy or parental controls. We should not ask children or parents or teachers to hold the responsibility for badly designed systems. This sector is 25% of world GDP, but still there is an idea that children should be resilient or responsible for navigating its pollution. For absolute clarity, of course, children should be digitally literate, but that is not instead of creating a digital world that has already been designed with them in mind. This approach of privacy and safety by design and default, it will not and is not designed to make the digital world 100% safe. A child can still access loads of things, but companies cannot then abuse it. For example, a child may come across self-harm, but a company can no longer use that browsing history to recommend more self-harm material. That is unacceptable. Thirdly, the approach must be tech neutral and outcome-based. Companies must be encouraged and incentivized to do what they do best, innovate to the desired outcome, which in this case puts the best interest of the child before profits. So to bring their services into scope with the age-appropriate design code, companies took different measures. For example, Instagram banned adults from messaging children and introduced prompts encouraging children to take breaks from scrolling their feeds. Google made Safe Search the default browsing mode for children and turned off autoplay on YouTube. And TikTok made under 16s accounts private by default. The tech-neutral and outcomes-based approach, as opposed to approaches which seek to focus on certain types of systems or to ban certain features or impose others, for example, this approach sets a bar and allows companies freedom to deliver. It allows for proportionality, it is future-proof, and avoids gaps and loopholes. Fourth, focusing on outcomes also means focusing on driving positive change rather than looking back and seeking to punish. The aim is a better system for children, not specifically settlements out of court to those who sue. This upstream and spot-checking approach is comparatively low red tape for companies and low regulatory burden for the regulator. The incentive for positive innovation has also meant that the changes companies have made to comply with the age-appropriate design code are now some of their top PR selling points. So in conclusion, I would say that we're now at a moment of great opportunity, but we are also at a moment of great risk. Lawmakers and regulators around the world want to see change, but they also risk taking divergent approaches to a global problem. If they do so, it could slow down or even undermine the whole effort. Different standards around the world could create regulation loopholes that tech firms will exploit. And those that want to comply will find it much harder to do so if they face a highly complex regulatory environment around the world. The approach of safety and privacy for children by design and default is now mirrored in law on both sides of the Atlantic. We now have the opportunity for a new global standard, and honestly, we can't afford to mess it up. Thank you.
Linda, thank you very much for your speech. Dziękuję bardzo wszystkim naszym prelegentom.
Thank you so much to all the speakers, those who joined us online and offline. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a short break.
Spotykamy się o godzinie 12:00
Let's meet at noon.
Tutaj będziemy rozmawiać o równowadze online.
We will be speaking about balance online and offline, and violence will be what we will focus on in the room next to us. Nette
Szanowni Państwo, wybiła godzina 12. Witamy po przerwie na kolejnej niezmiernie interesującej sesji poświęconej równowadze online-offline w czasach pandemii. Witam Państwa na sali, witam również naszych uczestników online. I chciałabym zapowiedzieć naszą pierwszą prezenterkę, panią Bognę Białecką, psycholog, prezes Fundacji Edukacji Zdrowotnej i Psychoterapii, która przedstawi nam jakieś wskazówki, co zrobić ze złymi nawykami korzystania z ekranów. Zapraszam.
Dziękuję, serdecznie witam. 20 minut, a temat, powiem szczerze, jest gigantyczny, dlatego że on się zrobił nam gigantyczny przez cały czas trwania nauki zdalnej, lockdownów. Więc jedziemy. Pierwsza rzecz, która się rzuca w oczy, to są badania, które przeprowadziliśmy jako Fundacja Edukacji Zdrowotnej i Psychoterapii trzykrotnie w 2020, 2021, 2022 roku. Między innymi zadawaliśmy pytanie o czas ekranowy. No to nikogo nie dziwi, że w czasie nauki zdalnej było to średnio 9 godzin przed ekranem. Natomiast chciałabym uświadomić, że po pierwsze to jest tak jak etat przed ekranem z nadgodzinami. Więc to naprawdę jest masa czasu spędzanego przez młodzież przed ekranem. Według badań NASK, gdzie oni zróżnicowali weekend i czas tygodniowy, no to tam wyszło, że w tygodniu przed ekranem 12 godzin, w weekendy po 6. I nie jest tylko czas ekranowy ważny, ale też jak oni sobie ten czas organizowali. Nie wiem, na ile Państwo mają doświadczenie na przykład z własnymi dziećmi, które były na nauczaniu zdalnym, ale typowy dzień nastolatka polskiego wyglądał w ten sposób, że oni się tak budzili na ostatnią chwilę przed logowaniem, zakładali na górę coś, żeby jakoś tak w miarę wyglądać, ale nie jedli nic, żadnego śniadania, nie czesali się i tak dalej, tylko logowali się i siadali przed ekranem, włączali panią, która coś tam mówiła, prezentowała, dawała jakieś zadania, i jednocześnie mieli na przykład otworzonego jeszcze jakiegoś czata, na którym rozmawiali ze znajomymi, dowiadywali się, jakie były zadania domowe, bo zapomnieli. Gdzieś tam w tle był jeszcze na przykład jakaś gra typu Slither.io, taka nie wymagająca za bardzo myślenia, ale pozwalająca na zabicie tego czasu nudnego. W czasie, kiedy na przykład pani się co chwila zawieszała na tym ekranie, zamarzała, bo miała słabe połączenie. Do tego oczywiście smartfon i na smartfonie kolejne powiadomienia z gier z mediów społecznościowych, albo jak w przypadku szczególnie młodszych klas, na przykład uciszanie osób, które normalnie w klasie to są takie rozrabiaki, które coś tam cały czas robią, przeszkadzają całej klasie, to oczywiście w czasie lekcji zdalnej też było uciszanie na przykład Oliwiera, który co chwila na czacie klasowym wysyła jakieś memy, pisze głupoty i potem młodzież odpisuje: słuchaj, ty idioto, przecież to wszystko zostaje i nauczycielka będzie widzieć, co ty robiłeś przez całą lekcję. Czyli to jest to, że oni się znajdowali na takim roller coasterze w gruncie rzeczy przez cały czas tej nauki zdalnej, mimo że sama nauka to była dosyć spokojna. Potem, jak już się lekcje skończyły, wreszcie wstawali, jedli coś, jakieś śniadanie, obiad, kolację. Czasami się ubierali. Jak był czas, kiedy do 16 była godzina policyjna, no to nie wychodzili w ogóle z domu. Natomiast coś tam się ogarniali zadanie domowe, a potem się zaczynało życie, które też się toczyło online, czyli komunikatory, media społecznościowe, rozrywka, gry, filmy, muzyka i tak dalej. I tak to wyglądało przez praktycznie cały czas nauki zdalnej. Znowu tutaj taka jedna rzecz, która jest bardzo ważna z badań NASK, które bardzo cenię w ogóle, dlatego że one są jedynymi takimi powtarzanymi cyklicznie w Polsce na ogromnej grupie osób badanych, gdzie jest pokazany wzrost czasu ekranowego naszej polskiej młodzieży i dzieci na przestrzeni lat. Proszę zobaczyć, w 2014 to tam było średnio 3 godziny, a teraz po pandemii, po nauce zdalnej to wzrosło do ponad 4 godzin średnio. Zdecydowanie więcej niż jest to zdrowe, szczególnie dla dzieci ze szkoły podstawowej. Problem, który się pojawił, ale o którym nie będę mówić, bo nie ma na to czasu. Nasze badania, tutaj są 3 raporty, które można sobie bezpłatnie ściągnąć z naszej strony, na przykład rodzice.co, wykazały bardzo duży wzrost depresyjności. Zresztą wczoraj też było o tym mówione, że jeden z głównych problemów, z którymi się po okresie nauki zdalnej, lockdownów, izolacji społecznej zmaga młodzież, to są nastroje depresyjne, epizody depresyjne. Tylko mówię, tym nie mamy czasu się zajmować, zajmijmy się po prostu tymi nawykami, które zostały. Pierwszy problem to jest taki, o którym już wiemy od paru lat, który się nazywa zespołem stresu elektronicznego. Amerykańska psychiatra dziecięcy Victoria Dunkley przeprowadziła szereg badań, ale też na podstawie swojego doświadczenia klinicznego jako psychiatra wyodrębniła, nazwała coś, co właśnie w tłumaczeniu polskim nazywa się zespołem stresu elektronicznego. Mówi ona o zaburzeniu rozregulowania, czyli braku zdolności dziecka do modulowania swojego nastroju, uwagi i poziomu pobudzenia w zdrowy sposób, który wynika z niezdrowego stosunku do ekranów, niezdrowego sposobu korzystania z ekranami. Problem jest taki, że w rezultacie u bardzo wielu dzieci i nastolatków pojawiły się zaburzenia rozwojowe, ale też intelektualne, też przede wszystkim związane z deficytem uwagi, które by się nie rozwinęły, gdyby te dzieci nie siedziały aż tak bardzo przyklejone do tych ekranów. I to było już znane wcześniej, natomiast w czasie nauki zdalnej, w czasie pandemii, w czasie izolacji to się bardzo mocno nasiliło. Co się przyczynia do tego powstawania tego zespołu stresu elektronicznego? Dużo przyczyn, natomiast 3 najważniejsze, które tylko zasygnalizuję. Pierwsza sprawa, właściwie to ja to już opisałam po części. Ciągłe aktywowanie odruchu walcz, uciekaj. Co to oznacza? Nasze mózgi w gruncie rzeczy nie są przystosowane ewolucyjnie do radzenia sobie z takim natłokiem nagłych, ciągle zmieniających się informacji i dźwięków, z jakimi mamy do czynienia w internecie. Jeżeli Państwo nie wierzą, a nawet jak mi wierzą, to i tak bardzo polecam posłuchanie sobie teledysku takiego polskiego rapera Max Silk. Teledysk ma tytuł Sensory Overload. Kilka minut, gdzie on w genialny sposób, naprawdę chylę czoło, opisuje typowe doświadczenie osoby nadmiernie korzystającej ze smartfonu, z internetu, z wszystkimi problemami. Przy czym dla osób urodzonych, tak zauważyłam, po roku 1980, przed 1980, przepraszam, to ten teledysk jest dość trudny do wysłuchania w ogóle. Ze względu na to, że tam czasami scena, w jednej sekundzie scena zmienia się po kilkanaście razy. Nie mówiąc już o tempie mówienia. Ja mówię w tej chwili szybko, a pan Max Silk mówi tak z 8 razy szybciej. Wszystko jest zrozumiałe, bardzo polecam. I teraz tak, takie ciągłe bombardowanie powiadomieniami, nowymi bodźcami powoduje, że cały czas nasze ciało znajduje się w stresie, jest podwyższone wydzielanie adrenaliny i kortyzolu, co oczywiście bardzo mocno zaburza nasze funkcjonowanie, a funkcjonowanie rozwijającego się organizmu dziecka, młodzieży tym bardziej. I oni jeszcze do tego sobie dokładają przez wielozadaniowość, tak jakby tych bodźców było mało. Oni dokładają sobie przez korzystanie z wielu urządzeń naraz i jednocześnie z wielu aplikacji naraz. Drugi mechanizm to jest oszukanie układu nagrody, czyli zalewanie mózgu nienaturalnym potopem dopaminowym, do którego też nie jesteśmy przyzwyczajeni, przystosowani, ponieważ te części mózgu, które są odpowiedzialne za przetrwanie, one naprawdę nie są w stanie zróżnicować zjawisk, które dzieją się online, od tych, które dzieją się offline. Czyli na przykład zwycięstwo w grze jest takim samym przetrwaniem i zwycięstwem, jakby się pokonało wroga, który właśnie zagraża mojemu życiu, na mnie napadł. Pornografia internetowa jest taką samą okazją do przedłużenia gatunku jak prawdziwy seks. Lajki, które się pojawiają w internecie, serduszka, pozytywne komentarze są takim samym sukcesem życiowym jak prawdziwy, szczery komplement wypowiedziany twarzą w twarz. I to wszystko bardzo mocno wciąga i bardzo, no właśnie taki przyjemny dopaminowy potop jest niezwykle kuszący, oczywiście nie tylko dla dzieci, nastolatków, dla nas też, tylko oni są na to bardziej podatni. I ostatni mechanizm, nadmiar jasnego światła, błękitnego, niebieskiego, gdzie ekrany są producentem takiego światła. Jeżeli korzystamy z nich wieczorem, czy szczególnie po nocy, tak jak wiele dzieci i nastolatków, ogromnie to zaburza nasz sen, powoduje, że ten sen nie jest pełnowartościowy, regenerujący i tak dalej. To znowu gigantyczny, osobny temat, ale to też się dokłada na przykład do powstawania deficytów uwagi. Problem z tym wszystkim, bo gdyby to był czas ekranowy, gdyby to były te mechanizmy, to jeszcze da się obejść trochę. Problem polega na tym, bo czasami słyszymy, no smartfony czy różne aplikacje to jest tylko narzędzie, od nas zależy, czy będziemy z tego korzystać rozsądnie, czy nie. Czyli jest takie porównanie, można by powiedzieć, do noża. Mam nóż i mogę nim pokroić chleb, mogę co więcej tym chlebem się podzielić z różnymi osobami, mogę tym nożem zaatakować kogoś i go zranić czy nawet zabić. To ode mnie zależy, jak ja użyję tego neutralnego noża, narzędzia. Natomiast niestety z samą budową smartfonu, czy bardzo wielu aplikacji, a szczególnie gier, jest tak, że one już mają wbudowane różne mechanizmy, które mają powodować w nas wyrobienie nawyku korzystania z nich. Żebyśmy spędzali tam dużo czasu, żebyśmy, no bo na przykład, znaczy już nie wchodzimy w mechanizmy marketingowe, ale chociażby z reklam, które gdzieś tam się pojawiają w czasie korzystania z aplikacji, jest finansowana bezpłatna aplikacja. Dlatego bardzo polecam Nir Eyal, książka Skuszeni, w której od strony kuchni, czyli od strony marketingowca opisuje, jak należy stworzyć produkt, który będzie powodował powstanie nawyku korzystania z niego. Ja bym powiedziała, że czasami wręcz nałogu. Bo wczoraj Wojtek był niesamowity, bardzo mi się podobał. Mówił o TikToku, on mówił o tym, że tam jest cała masa takich rzeczy, które są kompletnie bezwartościowe, a bardzo wciągają. I że to nie jest tak, że on ma potrzebę oglądania tego wszystkiego, bo on widzi, że to jest strata czasu, że to nie daje jakiejś wartości dodanej i że dlatego się zdecydował, co mi się podobało, taki radykalizm młodzieżowy, w ogóle odinstalować to, prawda? Tworzenie nawyków konsumenckich jest efektywnym sposobem zwiększenia wartości przedsiębiorstwa, podnoszenie wartości CLVT. Kwota zarobiona na użytkowniku, zanim nie przejdzie do konkurencji, przestanie korzystać z produktu lub umrze. Nawyki konsumenckie zwiększają częstotliwość korzystania z produktu, zwiększając tą kwotę zarobioną. Co to oznacza? Jak już mamy nawyk sięgania po jakąś na przykład aplikację, to jest on utrwalony, no to prawdopodobnie będzie to sytuacja, w której przestaniemy z tego skorzystać, jeżeli produkt jest dobry i ciągle rozwijany dopiero w momencie, kiedy umrzemy, tak? Chyba że konkurencja zrobi coś lepszego. I teraz zdajmy sobie sprawę, i to znowu jest skierowane dla niedowiarków, którzy uważają, że narzędzia informatyczne są tylko narzędziami, a nie mają za sobą żadnych mechanizmów, które by miały nas nakłonić do nawykowego czy wręcz nałogowego korzystania z nich. Bardzo ważna uwaga, która u Nira Eyala jest w tej książce. Nowe zachowania mają krótkie życie, ponieważ nasze umysły mają tendencję powracania na stare tory myślenia i zachowania. Ostatnie do ośrodka, pierwsze na zewnątrz. Innymi słowy, nawyki, nałogi wyrobione ostatnio to te, które najszybciej znikną. Badania pokazują, że stare nawyki trudno zniszczyć. Nawet jeśli zmieniamy rutyny, ścieżki neuronalne, pozostają wyryte w naszych mózgach i są reaktywowane, gdy tylko na moment odpuścimy kontrolę. I teraz tak, do wyrobienia nowego nawyku mówi się, że tak 21 dni jest potrzebnych. My mamy za sobą 2 lata korzystania, bardzo często poza kontrolą w ogóle rodziców i niezdrowego, z urządzeń elektronicznych przez nasze dzieci i nastolatki. Bardzo wiele z nich rzeczywiście zostało już przez elektronikę wytresowanych i nauczonych nawykowego sięgania po nią, chociażby po to, żeby zabić nudę. To jest jedna z rzeczy, o której mi dużo nauczycieli mówiło. Taka utrata kreatywności wśród dzieci. Częsta, że przedtem jeszcze było tak, że się rzucało jakiś pomysł i oni od razu mieli dużo pomysłów, a teraz jest tak, że głównie przychodzi im do głowy sprawdzić to gdzieś tam na smartfonie, w internecie, co tam można zrobić. Albo właśnie zabijanie nudy za pomocą sięgania po smartfon. No i teraz przez 15 minut mówiłam o tym, że jest strasznie, tak? Na szczęście mój następca będzie mówił o konkretnych też pomysłach na rozwiązanie, ale oczywiście, że chcę powiedzieć parę słów o tym i co z tym zrobić. Nawiasem mówiąc, czasami algorytmy są ciekawe, bo jak wpisałam i co z tym zrobić, to mi PowerPoint podpowiedział właśnie takiego smutnego kotka jako ilustrację, jego zostawiłam, stwierdziłam, pasuje. Co z tym zrobić? Wracamy do Victorii Dunkley i tego zespołu stresu elektronicznego. Przypominam, że to jest efekt takiego niezdrowej relacji z ekranami. I co w związku z tym możemy? Pierwsza dobra wiadomość, bo ja bardzo dużo pracuję też z dziećmi i młodzieżą. Prowadzimy warsztaty prawo jazdy smartfonem, poskromić cyfrowego tygrysa dla młodszych i przygody Piotrka i Selfika dla najmłodszych. I się okazuje, że jak pytamy młodzież i dzieci o ich oczekiwania i takie propozycje zasad, które można byłoby wprowadzić dotyczące elektroniki, to praktycznie każda grupa, a ich było wiele tysięcy już uczestników, czyli kilkaset grup, każda grupa mówi, abyśmy chcieli, żeby rodzice też z nami ustalili pewne zasady i nam pomagali ich przestrzegać. I to jest fajna sprawa, to znaczy, że oni sami chcą, żeby dorośli byli przewodnikami i chcieliby nam ufać. Wiem, że wielu dorosłych się czuje tak dosyć, no właśnie, co ja tam wiem, oni są bardziej sprawni ode mnie, jeśli chodzi o elektronikę. Owszem, ale ty jesteś bardziej sprawny i bardziej doświadczony, jeżeli chodzi o zdrowe zasady życiowe. Więc macie miejsce na dialog. Warto bazować, bo teraz tak, z mniejszymi dziećmi jest tak, że oni generalnie akceptują. Jak rodzic mówi, założymy na przykład Google Family Link, to oni tam, ale akceptują. Albo, że nie ma smartfonów po 21, czy w ogóle kontaktu z elektroniką po 21, mówią, no dobra. Nastolatki już oczywiście zaczynają dyskutować, zaczynają się buntować, zaczynają znać słowa kluczowe, które należy wpisać w wyszukiwarkę, żeby się dowiedzieć, jak obejść zabezpieczenia. I to robią. Więc co cenią sobie nastolatki? No oczywiście, że wolność i niezależność. I powiem szczerze, ja na tym najbardziej bazuję w dyskusjach z nastolatkami. Jeżeli chcesz być osobą wolną, niezależną, to wiesz, wydaje się, że to oznacza po prostu wolność, niezależność od woli dorosłych i tego, co dorośli narzucają. Ale czy ty chcesz być tresowany przez własny smartfon, który decyduje o każdym momencie twojego życia, co zrobisz, czy sięgniesz po niego na przykład i sprawdzisz jakieś powiadomienia? Możesz chociażby zadziałać, myśląc o tym, jakie powiadomienia mają przychodzić, a które chcesz wyłączyć, żeby cię nie rozpraszały, żeby projektować sobie okresy smartfonowej ciszy, na przykład podczas nauki, czy jedzenia, czy spotkań towarzyskich. Młodzież lubi być traktowana poważnie. Mechanizm dopaminowy, przebodźcowienia tłumaczymy młodzieży tak od 6. klasy i oni to rozumieją. Oni się czują dobrze, kiedy są traktowani poważnie i kiedy słyszą, w ten sposób funkcjonuje układ nagrody. Mówimy właśnie o neuroprzekaźnikach, o dopaminie, adrenalinie, kortyzolu i oni mówią, świetnie, lubię rozumieć, co się dzieje u mnie w głowie. Potrzebują dobrych argumentów. Dla nich to już nie będzie nie, bo nie, albo nie, bo się o ciebie troszczę, tylko rzeczywiście niestety tutaj potrzebujemy mieć garść dobrych argumentów, dlaczego pewne zasady chcemy wprowadzać. Oni cenią sobie otwartość, czyli że jeżeli oni mają jakiś argument, to że tego wysłuchamy i nie będziemy mówić, a tam jakieś bzdury znalazłeś w internecie, tylko że zbadamy temat. No i oczywiście przy nastolatkach są ważne negocjacje. Gdybym miała jedną zasadę jakąś taką podpowiedzieć, to byłaby ta zasada. Cokolwiek masz pod ręką, będziesz miało większy wpływ na twoje życie niż to, co jest daleko. O co chodzi? Że generalnie, zobaczcie, jeżeli coś mamy tuż w zasięgu ręki, to po to często sięgamy. Jaki jest najprostszy sposób na to, żeby odpowiednio się nawodnić? Bo większość z nas nie pije wody wystarczająco dużo, jak powinna w ciągu dnia. Przysięgam, widziałam badania. Nosić ze sobą butelkę z wodą. Po prostu jak ja ją mam cały czas przy sobie w torebce, to będę po nią sięgać za każdym razem, kiedy mi trochę zaschnie i właśnie żałuję, że zostawiłam butelkę tam dalej. Jeżeli mam cały czas smartfon przy sobie, to ja będę z niego korzystać non-stop. Jeżeli czasami go odłożę, to wtedy daję sobie przestrzeń pewnej wolności. Jeżeli się obudzę w środku nocy, sięgnę po smartfon. Jeżeli mam zwykły, normalny budzik, na którym mogę sprawdzić godzinę, to prawdopodobnie popatrzę, ojeju, 4 nad ranem, to może jeszcze pośpię i pójdę dalej spać, zamiast sprawdzać te wszystkie powiadomienia, które przyszły w międzyczasie. Bardzo też polecamy takie podejście, które się nazywa narzędziową skrzynką smart życia. Widzę, że czas mi się skończył, ale to już dosłownie do brzegu dobijam. Dlatego, że kiedy pierwszy raz zajęliśmy się tematem, to spisaliśmy wszystkie porady, jakie są możliwe, zasady dotyczące bezpiecznego korzystania i zdrowego. I się okazało, że jest tego cały kodeks Hammurabiego, wiecie, taki 40 podpunktów. Zanim dojdę do końca, to już zapominam, co jest na początku. I stwierdziliśmy, lepszym podejściem jest traktowanie tego jako takiej skrzynki narzędziowej, z której mogę wyciągnąć zasady, które są w tej chwili dla nas najważniejsze. I do tego bardzo zachęcam, że mamy dużo różnych możliwych zasad, ale mówimy, dobrze, to w takim razie wprowadzamy domową zasadę, 0 ekranów po 22 i rzeczywiście wyłączamy Wi-Fi w tym momencie. Drugą, na przykład też bez ekranów w czasie posiłków, tylko ze sobą rozmawiamy. Trzecią, planuję czas i co chcę zrobić online. Że mam godzinę i co ja chcę w tym czasie zrobić, a nie, że wchodzę, żeby odrobić zadanie z matematyki, a za chwilę oglądam filmy o pielęgnacji lam, prawda? Znamy to. Czyli skrzynka narzędziowa smart życia. I co jest też, co można robić? W każdej grupie są młode osoby, które mają mądre przemyślenia i dużo już wiedzą na temat nowych technologii pod kątem też tego, co się dzieje w naszych głowach. Takie jak Wojtek wczoraj. Warto tych ludzi znaleźć i ich zaangażować. Oni bardzo chcą pomagać swoim kolegom, szczególnie jeżeli widzą wśród kolegów takie nadmierne uwikłanie w ekrany. Wykorzystajmy ten potencjał. Jak 13-letni Wojtek mówi do 13-letniego Antka, słuchaj, za dużo czasu, nie ma z tobą o czym pogadać, bo ty tylko myślisz o tym, co tam grze, w którą grasz, to jest bardziej przemawiające niż kiedy przyjdzie pani Bogna, która tam jakieś rzeczy tłumaczy. I na koniec chcę wam pokazać parę plakatów wypracowanych przez młodzież podczas naszych zajęć prawo jazdy smartfonem. Takie kilka, ale fajnych. Uwierz w siebie. Nawet najmniejszy sukces to dawka naturalnej dopaminy. Smartfon to tylko narzędzie. Nie daj mu się wytresować. Używaj naturalnych źródeł dopaminy, sportu, hobby, zabawa z rodzeństwem. Jedno z moich ulubionych, nie graj za wiele, bo ci się mózg przegrzeje. I ostatnia zupełnie rzecz. Zapraszam do pobrania sobie bezpłatnie naszych mini poradników dla rodziców. Dzieci w wirtualnej sieci, taki ogólny, nastolatki w wirtualnym tunelu, już poświęcony trochę bardziej problemom nastolatków. Dostępne na tej stronie, tutaj jest też kod QR, można sobie zeskanować. Trochę z nich mamy w wersji drukowanej też ze sobą. I także, jeżeli ktoś jest zainteresowany większą ilością, której troszeczkę jeszcze mamy, to może do nas napisać na ten adres poradniki edukacja-zdrowotna.pl z prośbą o przysłanie, tylko że tutaj już się nam ten bezpłatny nakład po prostu się kończy, ale jeszcze trochę tego jest. Więc bardzo zapraszam i zostawiam z refleksją, Zastanawiaj się, czego mnie to nauczyło. Zawsze szukaj dobrych stron. Miej taki nawyk. Dziękuję.
Czy mamy pytania z sali? Sekundkę, pani Bogno, proszę poczekać. Może tutaj jakieś pytania się państwu zrodziły. Zachęcam też osoby online. Zadawajcie pytania. Nasi prelegenci są tutaj z nami. Wykorzystajmy ich wiedzę i ich doświadczenie. Pytań nie widzę. Ja pani... jest, przepraszam. Tutaj oświetla mnie lampa.
Nie widać.
Dzień dobry, Tomasz Mikołajczyk, nauczyciel informatyki, reprezentuję szkołę podstawową. Pojawił się taki problem w szkołach, no wiadomo, te telefony są nadużywane przez dzieci, jednak rodzic to jest ta osoba, która wyposaża dziecko w to narzędzie i płaci abonament i tak dalej. I teraz pytanie, czy szkoły powinny dawać sobie to prawo do odbierania wolności poniekąd, czy ograniczania tej wolności, korzystając z telefonów komórkowych przez dzieci, ale uwaga, nie na zajęciach podczas lekcji, tylko w czasie wolnym, w czasie przerw, tak? Dlatego, że no, pracownik, jeżeli idzie do pracy, wiem, że to jest inna sytuacja, ale jako osoba dorosła, no, nie ma czasu przerwy regulowanego przez pracodawcę. Tak?
To jest pytanie w gruncie rzeczy do prawnika. Z tego, co wiem, w prawie oświatowym jest zapis bardzo ogólny pod tytułem Szkoła reguluje sposób korzystania z urządzeń elektronicznych przez dzieci w szkole. To może oznaczać zakaz używania smartfonów na przerwach. Problem jedyny, który z tym jest, jeżeli coś takiego jest w statucie szkoły, to nie ma w ogóle dyskusji. Natomiast problem jest taki, że może to być w statucie szkoły, ale może być kompletnie nieegzekwowane. Co oznacza, że żeby to zadziałało, to potrzebujemy, żeby zarówno rodzice, jak i dzieci, ale przede wszystkim rodzice widzieli sensowność takiego rozwiązania. I tutaj znowu ta krzywa nam się kłania. Pod tytułem jest mały procent rodziców, którzy uważają, tak, dzieci nie powinny mieć tych smartfonów, bo to dużo rzeczy rozwala, ale potem jest dużo rodziców, którzy mówią, no właściwie to widzę jak bardzo, że cały czas wolny właściwie on spędza grając w coś tam, to nie jest dobre, czy coś tam oglądając, no ale co zrobię, jak no, wszyscy dookoła mają, to dziecko będzie wykluczone, czyli taka bezradność, że właściwie to byłoby fajnie, żeby oni więcej się ze sobą bawili, komunikowali i tak twarzą w twarz, ale jesteśmy bezradni. No i oczywiście tam gdzieś na skraju będą ludzie, którzy uważają, że jak zabierzemy dziecku smartfon, to ono będzie strasznie do tyłu i skazane na niepowodzenie w dalszym życiu, bo będzie do tyłu z technologiami. Więc tych z drugiej części też będziemy mieli. Tam często właśnie są prawnicy powołujący się na te prawo oświatowe. Ale na przykład powiem o doświadczeniu wielu szkół, z którymi współpracuję, że tam, gdzie zaczęto rozmawiać w ogóle o tym temacie, to się okazało, że mimo wszystko przyzwolenie ze strony rodziców na to, żeby były strefy, żeby na przykład duża przerwa była absolutnie strefą wolną od smartfonu, jest duże. Że oni też widzą sensowność takiego rozwiązania. Więc w gruncie rzeczy to jest kwestia tego, jacy rodzice posyłają dzieci do naszej szkoły. Czasami to jest kwestia edukacji, że oni widzą, że coś jest nie tak, że moje dziecko jest gdzieś tam za bardzo w to wciągnięte, ale nie wiedzą, o co chodzi, a jak się dowiedzą paru mechanizmów, to mówią, aha, rozumiem teraz i dobrze jest wprowadzać na przykład, szczególnie wobec tych mniejszych dzieci, strefy czasy wolne od smartfonu. Pamiętam jednego rodzica, który po prostu po tym, jak coś takiego zostało wprowadzone, przyszedł do pani dyrektor w szkole, a przedtem strasznie mówił, nie, to nie wyjdzie. Mówi, ojeju, jakie to jest cudowne. Mój syn, który naprawdę podczas 8 godzin w szkole nie siedzi przyspajowany do ekranu. Jakie to jest piękne. Nie? Poza tym nie za bardzo umiem z nim dyskutować, żeby jednak go odkładał czasami. Więc wiecie, to jest skomplikowany temat, ale do przerobienia. No. Tym bardziej jest fajnie, jeżeli w szkole tak czy inaczej ta elektronika w taki zdrowy sposób wykorzystywana jest w tym sensie, że gdzieś właśnie informatyka i tam uczymy dzieci takiego dobrego korzystania. Słuchajcie, możecie zrobić, poszukać informacji, możecie zrobić tam różne rzeczy, na przykład porobimy zdjęcia, zrobimy jakiś komiks, który ilustruje to, co się dzieje w szkole, możemy coś tam napisać, nakręcić film i tak dalej i pokazujemy te kreatywne sposoby, ale na to jest wydzielony czas. Bo wiadomo, dobra, już nie przekształcam tego w kolejny wykład, mam nadzieję, że jakoś tam odpowiedziałam panu.
To jeszcze jedno, ostatnie pytanie.
Technologicznie, aha.
Żebyś powiedziała o szkole odpowiedzialnej technologicznie, tak? Bo to też jest rozwiązanie i to jest to wyjście do informowania i edukacji rodziców.
Tak, bo na przykład tak, Fundacja Dbam o Zasięg ma taki program Szkoły Odpowiedzialnej Cyfrowo. My mamy z kolei program Szkoły Odpowiedzialnej Technologicznie, w tym sensie, że też staramy się przekazywać szkołom materiały edukacyjne pod kątem właśnie neuropsychologii, tego, co się dzieje w mózgu człowieka, kiedy za bardzo jesteśmy wciągani przez ekrany w niezdrowy sposób. I też na przykład bezpłatne scenariusze lekcji dla poszczególnych grup wiekowych przygotowane przez metodyków, więc to też może być jakąś pomocą taką od strony wsparcia właśnie szkoły, od strony merytorycznej.
Dziękujemy serdecznie. Tutaj taki drobiazg od organizatorów.
O, dziękuję bardzo. Maliny na dnie.
Przydadzą się na jesienne chłody.
Jest.
Serdecznie dziękuję. Pozostajemy w kwestii relacji rodzinnych i tej dbałości, jak to zrobić, żeby dbać o zdrowie psychiczne dzieci. Zapraszam pana Wojciecha Ottawę.
Let me welcome Wojciech Ottawa, psychologist and specialist in addiction psychotherapy.
Dzień dobry. Witam Państwa.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Będę miał przyjemność mówić
I will have the pleasure to tackle the issue of how we perceive
zaburzenia tej równowagi online.
the problem of imbalance between offline and online from the perspective of psychotherapists.
Czyli jakby nawiązując do wystąpienia pani Bogny,
So with regard to Bogna's presentation, I will do my best to explain why some families, not only of teenagers, but generally families, are not able to use advice and knowledge and valuable prophylaxis material
do którego mają dostęp, który
to
często
which they have full access, which they understand and they find reasonable. However, they're still not able to implement that in practice. I will talk about the importance of a relationship in the family and family bonds. I wanted Professor Wojcik tackled the issue from the perspective of psychotherapy, and I think that this issue is not, and the potential is not fully tapped during this conference. I think that all specialists working with teenagers and children, you interact with their parents and you need to take into account the broader family context.
o tym, jak to przywracanie równowagi
I will talk about restoring the balance in the families with teenagers who are internet addicts.
poradni, którą reprezentuję, młodzieżowa poradnia
I represent teenagers mental health center, and we're dealing with the youth
nie tylko spełniającą
who is intensely addicted,
szkody dla życia i funkcjonowania społecznego są bardzo wyraźne.
and the detriment to their social lives are important. They are paralyzing their lives and the lives of their families.
Na początek powiem króciutko o badaniach w tym temacie.
Let me quote some research.
Takim Głównym i najbardziej wyrazistym w różnych badaniach te odnośniki takie.
You can see some bullet points with a reference to literature, to some screening research and examination. So the main conclusion resulting from the research is number one, so positive relationship between the parent and the child is a factor protecting protecting them from developing problems and addiction to gaming.
Granie wystąpi. I co ciekawe, szczególnie dotyczy to relacji ojciec.
And that is especially related to the relationship between fathers and children. When it comes to protective factors, including the positive perception of family life, warm relationship in the family, and close relationship between the parent and the child. When it comes to predictors of such problems, you can expect that from families with poorer structure, with the conflict between family members, and some internal place between family members.
To nasilenie problemowego używania mediów interaktywnych wiąże też z niską.
So intensive use of such media is related to poorer family relationship. When it comes to cohesion of a family, from our therapeutic experience, we learn that too much of, and if the bond is too close, that is a context for gaming addictions and heavy use of media. The risk factors: less time spent with families, with parents, less emotions, hostility from the side of parents, and poorer quality of parenthood. Playing the games can be a shelter from difficult family relationship. And here I would like to present as an example one of my patients who heavily abused social media. He could spend all nights online on different fora and in the social media, texting with numerous people. That was related to some severe consequences to his life. He didn't cope with his school obligations.
Jego sytuacja rodzinna wyglądała tak, że
his family situation was specific. His father was addicted to alcohol for many years.
Stosował przemoc wobec matki tego.
And there were acts of violence against his mothers from the side of his father. That happened in the evenings, and the kid had to mediate between the parents. After a dispute, he told me that he switched on his computer to find somebody to talk to and to calm down.
Do takiego problemu nałogowego używania.
Apart from addiction to media, because these pieces of research, this is correlation research, but they present some premises, and based on our experience, we know that we can think about it as a circular system. So deterioration of family relationship creates the environment in which problematic use of electronic media is present, and if it occurs, it deteriorates the family relationship.
No to wiadomo, że jednym z objawów uzależnień behawioralnych proponowanym przez
So one of the Mark Griffiths emanation of addiction is conflict inside the family.
i potem jakby to koło przyczynowo-skutkowe
So this is a vicious circle.
się nakręca.
The problem is becoming even more serious.
W czasie terapii staramy się jakoś
During the therapy, we're trying to put a stick in this wheel or to slow down the process and to decelerate it
to też z badań zdrowie psychiczne rodziców
or reverse the direction.
to jest
So let me quote another research on parents of kids abusing media. Sometimes it is related to a moderate or severe depression of a parent, which ends up in abuse of online games. Let me talk about the general role of parents and their impact on the balance between online and offline life for their children. It is also related to extensive consumption of sweets. This is the role of parents to teach self-control through setting limits and boundaries,
mentalizowanie dzieci, czyli
but also through mentalizing their children, so joining their mental and psychological situation, showing their understanding of what they feel.
to również wspiera regulację emocji, ale również
That helps to regulate emotions and increase the level of self-control. Another role is behavior modeling.
późnej adolescencji potrzebują wsparcia w używaniu
Until
i to jest
adolescence, children need boundaries when it comes to the use of screens. Social media and games can be a source of addiction.
no tak, to takie najważniejsze, wciągające.
So these are the most captivating activities. Also watching TV series and pornography.
Ale to, że adolescenci potrzebują wsparcia, to też jakby jest związane z neurobiologią.
The adolescents needs support because of their natural processes. The front cortex is responsible for regulation of impulses and self-control. This part of the brain develops until the third decade of our life. Also, young adults, they do not have this part of brain fully developed.
Młodzi ludzie pozostają nadal zależni od swoich rodziców.
Young people are still dependent on their parents.
Rodzice pozostają w tej sytuacji możliwości wpływu na to, co robią dzieci. Nie zawsze wiedzą, jak
Parents can impact the behavior of their children. Sometimes they don't feel that impact, but they have it.
bezpieczne więzi rodzinne sprzyjają samemu
Safe family bonds foster self-regulation among the members of the family, especially children, and it has been confirmed by numerous research.
emocji. Jeżeli chodzi o rodziców dzieci
When it comes to parents of children addicted to media,
te dzieci potrzebują szczególnego wsparcia.
these children require support in order to regulate their natural mechanisms.
Zdecydowana postawa rodziców jest często kluczowa w tym, żeby
So a parent needs to take a firm position
przemocą jest obejmowana
Because if we get in contact with the child, we take care of entire family.
Ci rodzice stoją przed wyzwaniem radzenia sobie z tym silnym konfliktem
The parents need to deal with heavy conflict when it comes to the use of electronic devices and technology. So there are some acts of violence in the family.
Rosły nastolatek, któremu matka
A young adult or adolescence, and the mother can even beat the mother who decided to switch off the computer.
zdesperowany ojciec
Or a desperate father starts fighting with their son.
te konflikty mogą być naprawdę mocno
So the conflicts
nasilone i same
can be deep and they become problem themselves.
regulowanie własnych emocji.
So self-control and regulations of your own emotions as a parent is also of high importance.
Teraz powiem o takich specyficznych
Let me say a few words about quite specific deficits and problems of parents of addicted children.
albo nie mają wiedzy na temat konstruktywnych
They're lacking knowledge about constructive principles and limitations with regard to the use of electronic media. If they decide to implement, to set some rules, they are not able to get through the first symptoms.
daje objawy ustawienne analogiczne do tych, z którymi mamy do czynienia w uzależnieniach chemicznych.
They are similar to the situation when you stop taking some toxic substances.
Rodzica to jest, oni mówią, on leży,
So this period of withdrawal symptoms is especially difficult. So when the kid is just laying on their bed and staring at the ceiling, the level of uncertainty is rising and they start to withdraw from the rules they had set before.
ci rodzice też są
Those parents are also helpless in terms of monitoring activity and also limiting access of children to media. They don't have the skill to strengthen strengthen the child's position in case of small progress. Sometimes the therapist says to children, to parents, that the problem has been tackled, that there is progress, and parents, quoting the same facts which are available to the therapist, they say nothing has changed and that the kid is still hopeless.
i wreszcie
And finally, a very important issue.
mają negatywny stosunek o tym
They have a negative attitude, which I'm going to discuss again soon, negative attitude towards games. But there is also a lack of coherence from the parents concerning the use of electronic media, usually taking the form that mothers are more worried by this use of electronic media. They say that it's a disaster, it's terrible, that the child is moving in a wrong direction, that it certainly will be bad. And the fathers say, well, no, it's not so bad. Don't label him as crazy. And it's very difficult for these parents to build a common attitude in upbringing their children, which is necessary to build an environment for upbringing which will be strong enough to confront the addiction mechanisms.
specyficzne cechy rodziców,
Specific features of parents of children who are addicted to internet games. First, they have difficulty understanding that their children should be educated about internet games and using screens. They rather assume that children know everything, they know it better than I do, so what should I explain to them? And the second thing is that frequently parents had an allowing attitude at earlier stages of development, and suddenly when they notice that the child is wholly captured by those games or media, by this topic in general, then those games and media have become enemy number one, and there is a strong criticism of gaming. The parents start to forbid playing, and they become authoritarian in their attitude. So you can imagine it makes the problem of playing the games worse. It's a result which is repetitive in research, and I must say that therapeutical recommendations and education are not sufficient here because parents are incapable of using them because they either remain passive or they become too authoritarian, becoming a factor aggravating the problem. Some difficulties which make it even more difficult to tackle the problem, both on the side of parents and children. We have a few families at our center where every person is not neurotypical, where we have a child with Asperger's syndrome. It's not a diagnosis used now, it's rather autism spectrum. But Asperger's, the father has Asperger's, the mother who has recently diagnosed herself with ADHD, and siblings who are also not neurotypical. And you can imagine how difficult it is in such case to restore balance of building communication and rapport. Not optimum upbringing style, difficulties in communicating within the family, taking too much care of the children, and to sometimes taking an oppressive form. When the mother wants the child to stop playing, they consequently still bring food to the place where they play, so that they eat something at least, because they don't eat anything while playing. Aggression occurring, I've already discussed that. Another important issue I'd like to mention is that there is a strong anxiety and fear of separation and moving to the next phase of family life. In the adolescent period, in case of teenagers, there's stress associated in the family with the fact that we will stop being a family that we used to be so far, that the home will be empty, or there will be fewer of us because somebody is going to move out. And here sometimes this abuse of media is, or maybe a form of separating oneself from the family, but also pseudo-separating from the family, which actually deepens the dependency. It doesn't build independence and being able to take care of oneself, but it deepens the dependency. Also, from the systemic point of view, we can look at using the media as having an important function in the family. I won't go deeper in this topic because it's quite complicated, but similar to other symptoms or disorders such as anorexia or depression, have this a function of which the family is not aware. Two functions: it's stabilization, protecting the status quo of a family, protecting the family, for example, from some important change, or stimulating change in the family, because the current situation has become unbearable, and the family is stuck in it. They cannot move forward. Then the symptom can move the family. So here, in our therapeutical work, we often ask the questions of the functions of symptoms. What would happen? What bad things would happen to the family if the problem disappeared? I know I'm out of time already, but let me just say about the most important thing from this point of view, because much of I've written here is in obvious reference to those obstacles I discussed before. What I want to emphasize is that we should look at activity as play, asking people what the young people play online, what role they play, if they have an avatar, who is this avatar? This, in case of younger children, we have the space of playing where their basic needs, conflicts, and development issues are reflected. In older children, it's the space of using the internet. When we are sometimes wondering at our clinic what is the problem psychologically of the patient, we look at what this child does online, and very often we find clear guidelines to understand their needs there online. And here, referring to some presentations at this conference, sticking to clear and obvious principles of using the media. These principles are more effective if you agree them with children. Second point, monitoring and supervision of the teenagers' activity online is important, but it's not important in itself, but it's important in association with the parents engaging in developing the family relationships with the child and building a more informed and constructive aptitude for upbringing, which should shift towards a democratic style or authoritative style. And if everything goes well, we enter a loop which is reducing the problem, allowing to regain the online-offline balance, forms of work which are useful here, parenthood consulting, family therapy, very often pair therapy of the parents, but also often we refer parents to individual psychotherapy and workshops of parenting skills. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję serdecznie.
Thank you very much. I can see that with every topic we go deeper into the problem. We have more and more to say. The time is pressing. Questions, perhaps? One question from the floor. Would somebody like to ask something or give us a comment? If not, then I believe the email that Wojciech shared with us a second again. Since there are no questions from the floor, please let me thank you for the presentation and comment what you said in the last part about asking children and recognizing what needs these activities meet. It was discussed yesterday a few times, and I'm wondering if it could result in therapy, in searching for and seeking to satisfy those needs elsewhere. Yes. Yes, indeed. Online activity could be compared to activity in fantasy. So the characters you impersonate give you a huge range of options from which you can choose. And choosing a particular character, in my understanding, is determined by subconscious needs, and it's worth, not only in case of children, but also in case of parents, to talk about it and wonder why the child is playing this and not that, and how else we can
realizować albo
satisfy their needs, or what should the parents be made sensitive of? I have a question concerning how long such support of a family with such problems takes, with problems of abusing screens. Just an estimation from the first consulting meeting with you of the parents and the child. Are we rather speaking of a few meetings, or is it a therapy that will take a few or perhaps more than a dozen months? That depends on the level of the problem and of the disorder in the family. But statistically, if a family is generally healthy, and, for example, this media abuse occurred in reaction to some clear stress or a specific crisis situation within the family, then a few meetings can be sufficient. But if we need to face many years of chronic pathology in the family, and that associated with disorders of individual members of that family, then this therapy could last well over a year, or even years sometimes. I'd like to ask, if I may, whether the risk of children's of the non-normative children with Asperger's, is there a bigger risk of being addicted in case of these children? Is there any research concerning this? And perhaps I won't sound professional, but are there any specific therapies for this group of children? Yes, indeed. The autism spectrum disorders are listed as the most common coexisting disorders with addiction to media. We experience this a lot at our clinic because we have really a lot of those patients with Asperger's syndrome among our patients, if not a majority. I haven't heard of any specific therapeutical programs for this group of patients. Well, yes, because I have a dilemma, because I'm a psychologist. I work at a school a few hours, and many programs purchased for children with autism spectrum are computer software using technology, and at the same time I get questions whether this therapeutical method supports or is detrimental for children who abuse the screens and technology at home, subjecting them to therapy in the same formula, in the same form. I can't answer this question. I think that would require some research. So it seems like there's somebody else who could answer this question. I'm returning back to Victoria Dantley and electronic stress syndrome, where she says that as a psychiatrist she has more and more patients who have all syndromes from the autism spectrum or ADHD, but if they are diagnosed well, it turns out that they don't have those normal standard factors, and at some point what Wojciech mentioned worked. So that is excessive, very intense, long-term contact with screens, which have influenced their development of a child which otherwise would be healthy. This problem occurred. And in this situation, Victoria Dantley said that any contact with the screen damages the effects. And there are few therapeutical tools to differentiate electronic stress syndrome from a real disorder with a large biochemical or biological component. Thank you again.
Zapraszam naszego
And I would like to invite our next speaker,
Sigurdur Sigurdsson.
Sigurdur Sigurdsson, representative of Safe Internet Project. The floor is yours.
Pronunciation of my name, it's very difficult. My name is Sigurdur Sigurdsson. Sometimes it's a tongue twister for myself, even though I speak Icelandic. So it can be quite difficult for foreigners or non-Icelandic speakers, and even Icelandic speakers, to pronounce it. So thank you very much. My lecture is called The Children Are Always on Their Phone. The reason why I called it that is because in my travels around Iceland, talking to teachers, parents, and children, this is the sentence I hear the most. The children are always on their phone. What can we do? Before I answer that question, a little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Sigurður Sigurdsson, and I work as a specialist in media usage of children and teenagers at the Safer Internet Center in Iceland. The Safer Internet Center is also run by a parental organization. It gives us a great opportunity to talk to parents all over the country. But like I said, the children are always on their phone is the typical question and statement said by teachers and parents. But when just recently I started to ask them, have you tried to rearrange the sentence and ask, why are the children always on their phone? Why are the children always on their phone? And the teenagers in the crowd, when I said it for the first time, were like, yeah, you never ask us. Why are we always on the phone? And the answer the parents get and the teachers get are simply astonishing and make change this possible in attitude, and it helps children quite a lot. So if you're always asking or saying these things, the children are always on their phone and recess at home. Try ask yourself, why are the children always on the phone? And don't forget to talk to the children themselves. Even though they pretend sometimes to be, Mom, you shouldn't ask me this. But we need to keep this dialogue open with the children, because the world has changed very fast the last few years. When I started work with children 12 years ago, the only thing we had to worry about if they got a Facebook account or not. Today, it's a lot more challenging, and like I heard here today, parents often say, the children know more about this than me, much more. So I can't keep up with them. But according to our research and just talking to children, they want guidance on online-offline balance. When I talk to them and they get quite emotional about this, they demand it. They need our help. So if we have the attitude of saying, like the children know better, they may know better on the technology side, but we need to guide them on how to behave online and set frame and limits, like was said here before. Have any of you heard of about the Icelandic prevention model regarding alcohol usage? Raise hand if you do. Two, great. So I will go in a little bit in 1998, we were the world or European champions in teenage alcohol drinking. And today, we are in the bottom half, or like the world champion of least online drinking. And this didn't happen by accident, like some media have said about this model. This was done, and many people asked, how did the Icelandic manage to do this? And it might surprise you, it's quite a common sense. The parents were involved. Researchers were presented that showed the impact of parents. What can parents do to reduce alcohol usage of their children? Like, for example, the parent walk, where parent would just walk around the neighborhood and be there for their kids. Parents were informed how they can prevent youth drinking, and of course, why they should do it. Parents were empowered. They were taught to talk with the children, which we need a little bit today. How parents can spend time with their children and informed that togetherness with their kids severely helps bring it down to youth drinking. And parents got framework on how to stop youth drinking. And on the way, we showed the parents that what they were doing was doing something magical. Like, we didn't stop in 2003. People were giving data every year and in their about their community. But how can we use this experience to help us with teaching online balance? In our opinion, it's basically the same. Show researchers that show impact of parents, and we have a lot of them, but we have a little bit of issue to tell parents about them. Parents need to be informed on how they can help their children. Parents need to be empowered. We need to tell people that they are a key figure in helping their children reach online balance. We need to, and we do it in Iceland today, we need to teach parents how to talk to the children about their online world. Because for some parents, this is something unknown, or many parents. How parents can spend their time with their children online, share their life online. And parents need a framework to help the children in the online world. And parents need to be shown data they have positive effect. So basically, taking this prevention model and take it over to the online world. And what we hear a lot, can't we just ban the phones? That's a typical statement from parents and teachers. But in our experience, we can't help children balance with the bans. That I haven't, at least yet, seen non-research that supports the fact that banning phones in schools, at home, helps us in any way. But children need a framework, a boundary on how to behave. And that's the biggest compliment to children today, in Iceland at least, when I talk to them, that they're lacking frame. And the funny thing is, because I'm also the head of the coordinator of the Icelandic Safer Internet Youth Panel, I asked them, what do you feel if you had no frame and could do anything you wanted online? And one girl said, if I had no frame or no boundaries, I would feel like my parents didn't love me. So the children are asking for a simple, clear frame. And simple is maybe the key word, because I was visiting a school a few years ago which has strict rules on where and how they should use the phone in the school. And it was like reading, the user agreement of an app. There were subsections, there were sections, and they didn't know, can I use the phone I can't use the phone here, but I can use it right here. So we have to have a simple, clear frame. Children need to be part of the discussions about the rules. And I will give you an example how it can work. And us grown-ups need to be a good role model. A lot of children complain that they are trying to follow some rules online, but the parents are breaking them constantly. For example, internet commenters. Children see if you comment something online, something negatively, and on the other hand, the parent is telling them to behave positively online. So we need to be a good role model. And there are no magical solutions. We will solve this overnight. I'm going to play you a short video, which is a message from our youth panel. Unfortunately, it's in Icelandic, but there is a English text, and it's just 1 minute, so hopefully it would give you a clear example on the message the youth is sending their parents.
Netið frábært ef við notum það rétt og á ábyrgan hátt. Hlustið á börn þegar þau segja frá ykkur sem þau lentu í á netinu. Þið berið ábyrgð að börnin ykkar fylgja aldurstakmörkunum, hvort sem það á samfélagsmiðlum, í tölvuleikjum eða á streymisveitum.
Það þarf að kenna á stillingar og forritum til að tryggja öryggi barna.
Grundvöllur þess að eiga í samskiptum á netinu að kunna félagsleg samskipti. Og það hlutverk ykkar að kenna börnunum það. Kennið börnum að fylgja reglum á netinu, hlusta og bera virðingu fyrir öðrum.
Börn bera aldrei ábyrgð á því að fullorðin manneskja áreiti þau.
Ræðið við börnin ykkar hvað þau voru að gera á netinu, rétt eins og þau ræðið skóladaginn. Börn eiga ekki upplifa pressu til að fara á samfélagsmiðla ef þau eru ekki tilbúin til þess.
Mikið af áróðri á samfélagsmiðlum sem getur leitt til þess að börn fái ekki að mynda sína eigin skoðun.
Börn eiga aldrei að finnast skulda einhverjum, til dæmis gera eitthvað sem þau vilja ekki, eins og að senda myndir eða deila persónulegum upplýsingum. Áður en börn fara á samfélagsmiðla mikilvægt að kenna þeim að standa með sjálfu sér.
Þið þurfið líka að haga ykkur á netinu því þið eru fyrirmyndir okkar.
This is a message from our youth. They need the help. They are quite fed up with being blamed about how they are behaving online, of course, because the media is always telling them that they are doing something wrong. The blame is always never put on us grown-ups. So this message was to show them that they are demanding some action from us grown-ups. So what have we been doing in Safer Internet Safter in Iceland lately? This is the two projects we have been running for the last months. On the left, we have a project we did in cooperation with a school where we met with teenagers, talked to them. They made their own presentation. They had influence on what they were going to teach younger kids in their school. So they were taught to be a positive role model online and are teaching them how, the younger children, the 12-year-olds, how to behave and how to get help if they are in a difficult situation. Like, according to our research, majority of Icelandic children don't know where to reach out if they are feeling threatened or are unsure about something online. And the picture on the left, or right, sorry, is a meeting where the teachers, where the parents and the kids met to figure out how to have positive social media and technology use in the school. And when the kids got what their say, it was so important because they were thinking about things us grown-up hadn't even thought about. Like, for example, the question, why are we always in our phone? Because the teenager, for example, didn't have any outside area they can play. Maybe if we have something to do in the school except for sitting around, and then it's very easy to pick up the phone and just hang around in that. So the agreement was made between the school parents and the kids to do this positively and open up for have more things to do for the children. Basically, we are starting to focusing more on the parents, to empower parents. Like we did with alcohol usage, we are now focusing to do it with the parents today. That's why we set up the online agreement between parents on how to raise children in the online world. It was based on this one, which is the parent agreement, and it was one of the key parts in the prevention model that parents agreed upon how to raise their kids. For example, do not host a parentless party at your home, for example. So we decided, and it was demanded by the parents, to set up an online agreement. The reason we decided to have this empty, because we don't want the parents to fight about wording of the agreement, but here parents work together and put boundaries from the children. Because what parent agreement is very powerful, example, the age restrictions. In one school, they decided to appoint 3 persons when something like a new video game comes out. They will research this video game and tell every parent, no, this is not suitable for our children, or yes, this is suitable for our children. So parents working together to solve these problems. So the friends can say, Mom, you don't allow me to go on Snapchat, but all of my friends are on Snapchat. With this agreement, they just said, when they have the right age, whether it's 13, 14, or 15, well, the parents agree, it's just the rules now. And it's very positive to have the children part of this discussion. So in conclusion, we need to be active in discussion with our children about everything online. Unfortunately, our research shows in Iceland that when they are 13 years old, they are a little bit set free online. Parents don't feel like they need to help them anymore online. That's something we need to change. How we need to empower parents, give them the tools to help them raise up the children in the online world. We need to empower parents. No parents should be able to say, I know nothing about this, I can't do this. If somebody says that, we need to give them the tools and help them organize and talk to the children. It's our duty as grown-ups to help the children in the online world, both the school, the community, the parents, and the children. And the final point, because I heard school says that it should be the job of the parents to do this. I heard parents say the school needs to teach about this. It's all of our jobs. There's nothing we can do on one place. The school needs to help us with this. We, the parents, need to help us, and the children are more than willing, in my experience, to take part of this. So listen to the children, and yeah, that's my final message. Listen to the children. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience. I think that it's a good portion of knowledge for us. Have you, może jakieś pytania? Any questions? Mogą Państwo zadawać pytania w języku polskim.
You can ask questions in Polish. We will translate the questions.
Do you have the English version of this parent agreement, maybe? Because it was in your language, but I would be interested in English one.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Do you have the English version of this parents agreement you showed on the slide?
Not the parents agreement, yes, but not the online agreement yet. But I can send you the English version if I can get your email. The English version will be ready hopefully soon. We are still in the testing process in Icelandic, but of course we need to do it in English because there's a lot of non-Icelandic speaking parents in Iceland.
Maybe I will have one more question because I think it's your work with parents very important, and on this conference yesterday and today, many times we spoke about how important group it is, but on the other hand, often underrated or not addressed. And how do you deal with those parents who are not interested in collaboration or in participation in such projects and so on?
It's a very good question. My experience, as we first of all need to focus on the most interested parents, because we need to grow the group in, like, for example, classroom. And in my experience, like, we have the super parents, we have the just normal parents, and then completely not interested. What we need to do is upheave the status of the super parents and bring them all together. If we can get 50% on the first meeting, 50% of parents on the first meeting where this online agreement is discussed, next time maybe 60%, next time maybe 70%. It's a constant work. It's so if we can get maturity, it gives a social pressure to the other who weren't interested at first, and then we come later when see, oh, everybody's doing it, I need to go too. But we of course can't bring everybody, but if we can get the maturity, we can help, and even those who are, because when we are doing this, we are not only helping our child, we are also helping the other children who are in the group with our children, even though their parents are not willing to be part of this.
Thank you very much. There's no questions once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To była już ostatnia prezentacja w tej.
This was our last presentation in this session. So now it is time for our lunch break. Let's meet again at the conference room at 2:30 at the next presentation. Thank you and goodbye.